Hello and welcome to, yes, another episode of Genealogy Quick Start. And today, guess what? We have two new quick starts. How do they keep doing it? Jim and Michael are constantly coming up with amazing quick starts. And today we have the honor of having an amazing YouTube researcher, genealogist, has a fabulous show that puts our little 2,000 people to shame, but we love each and every one of our 2,000 people. But man, does she have an audience. And just peeking in on Aimee Cross's channel, I learned so much from her. And I really am looking forward to today where you can learn from her as well. She's going to share something with us. You know, I love new processes, but she's going to share with us the initial steps for pre-1850 research. Are you doing pre-1850 research? You know, when people become tick marks, yes, people get to see what it feels like when everyone except for the head of the household is just a tick mark, kind of like how they treated enslaved people, just a tick mark, no name. And so Aimee is going to show us this interesting process called a census evaluation, where we can figure out who these people are and how they're related. I am just so excited about this because I have a lot of research that is pre-1850, and I'm looking forward to some tips. Jim and Michael came up with this quick start called short-term spouse. Like, I have no idea what that is. I'm not even going to delve into it. I'm going to allow them to tell you what the heck a short-term spouse is. So without further ado, I'm going to tell you first that Jim Beidler is not with us here today, but we do have Mr. Genealogy Tip of the Day, Michael John Neal. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing well, Shamel. How are you? How are you?
So, Michael, did I hear you say you're about to have a baby?
No, I did not say that I'm about to have a baby.
Oh, I thought your tree was expanding more.
No, well,
Okay.
that's a whole separate issue. But I do have, speaking of having babies, I have my original baby book, and there's a
What?
couple of my mother has filled out my pedigree chart. So this is oh, there we go.
Uh-oh.
This is the
Oh my
first.
goodness.
Yeah, there's some blanks there, but she's got her side pretty completely filled out, which I thought was pretty cool. And my picture, this card was tucked in the baby book. The grocery store, this is small town USA for you. The grocery store cut my picture that was in the newspaper and
Oh
sent
my
a
gosh.
card to my parents. There's my picture that was in the paper when I was an infant in that picture. So
That is so
um,
cool. So wait a minute. Why did the supermarket send that card to your parents?
it's called marketing. It's called marketing. They
Okay.
did that. Yeah, they would do that. I've also got my feeding instructions from 1968.
Okay, this might be the clue to what is the matter with you. What is on
That
that
could
feeding? What are those feeding
I
instructions?
was to be fed at 2, 6, and 10 a.m. and 2, 6, and 10 p.m. 12 ounces of Similac liquid and 12 ounces of water. Um, and she was to use the terminal heating method, and the green can was the can I was supposed to be eating out of.
Terminal heating method. What the heck is that?
I don't know what that means. I do not know what that means, and I can't ask if I can't. My mom is no longer here for me to ask, but maybe there's somebody in internet land that's listening who's would have been of the era to know what that would mean. But that's before my memory works, shall we say? Um,
That is so cool, Michael. So are you saving did you save your children and your grandchildren's memorabilia like that from their births?
I've got some of it, yes, not quite as much. I've got some of it, yes.
That is so cool, Michael. Your descendants are like so lucky. I hope they realize how lucky
They're
they
gonna have
are.
a lot of stuff to go through. That's the drawback to all of that, unfortunately. We could do a whole show on what to keep and what to get rid of.
Oh boy, don't start getting everyone upset and telling them to rip up their scrapbooks again.
Yeah, we
All
better
right.
not do that. We better not do that. So
So
speaking of
let
people, why don't we see who's in the
yes,
comments
who's
tonight telling us
here?
they're here?
Hey, number one again is Judy from Chicagoland, Fox Valley Genealogical Society. Hi, Judy. Hi, Janet. She said, great presentation on Germany at, oh, are you watching Jim in Hartford? All right. Angela Allen from Chicago. The black and gold is in the room. I just want to make sure you guys know that Genealogy Quick Start's number one genealogy society is here. Why do we call Chicago, the African American group in Chicago, our number one? Because when we share our newsletter, they send it out. And when I tell you that over 100 people open this newsletter, that's why you should subscribe. Get into fun and most definitely share Genealogy Quick Start with your members. So what else? Who else do we have here, Michael? We have Cassie. Hi, Cassie, here from Cleveland. Yay. You're visiting Texas. Okay. You come home with some cowboy boots. Hello, Jean from Collegeville, PA. And thank you so much for being at AUGS and supporting my presentation. Hi, Diane from Chicago Heights in Illinois. Thank you so much for being here. So, Michael, I am dying to know what this quick start is all about. So you and Jim, did I say Jim wasn't going to be here?
Yes, you
All
did.
right. So I'm sad Jim's not here with us, but he'll be back. He'll be back. Okay. So what do we have here for this quick start? We're calling it short-term spouse. What does that mean, Michael?
Well, it means a person to whom your ancestor or relative was married for a very short time, and sometimes marriages last decades. Sometimes they last a little shorter amount of time than a decade. Sometimes they do good to last days or weeks. And so in this quick start, we're going to be talking about why you should look for these short-term records about these short-term marriages, some clues that there might have been a short-term marriage. Sometimes it can be hard to get those clues because unless the person died, sometimes people don't like to reveal they had a short-term marriage. It's one of those things that sometimes people don't, and they may indicate on other records they'd not been married that time. And they might have gone back to their maiden name or a previous married name, and so sometimes it can be hard to discern these things. We're going to talk about some ways you can get some clues about those short-term spouses, because anybody, especially if you're really stuck on this ancestor, male or female, or depending on whatever time period it is, you still might get some clues from that short-term marriage. It might have been someone they knew back east or across the pond or whatever. And even if the marriage didn't last very long, the fact that it existed and some of the records about it could be helpful to you in your research.
And so when you say that people might not want to share their short-term marriages, I didn't realize how many short-term spouses there were. You remember Jonathan, he's part of Reclaim the Records. I call them the genealogy vigilantes, who go out and make sure that records that should be in the public domain are available, right?
Right.
So all of a sudden, these New Jersey marriage indexes are available now on Internet Archive. So I said, let me go look. And I started just looking up random people and calling them and saying, hey, I didn't know you was married. Were you married before? And they're like, what are you looking at? So when someone answers a question with a question,
Oh, well,
there's something going on.
I was going to suggest you just focus on the dead people, but marriages are
That's a
public.
good idea.
Marriages are public records and all that kind of thing. But the flip side of this is you want to have people to speak to when you go to the next family reunion. So you've got to decide where to draw those lines a little bit.
All right. So let's do short-term spouse. You ready, Michael?
I am ready.
All right. So step one for short-term spouse is, of course, to pick an ancestor. And then step two is, what are the gaps in the chronology? So how can we figure out what the gaps are?
I mean, this is probably one of the big clues. If there's a 5 year time period or even a couple year time period where you can't find anything out about this person, they might have lived somewhere else. They might have moved somewhere else. They might have evaporated from their records. But with females in particular, if there was a marriage they only lasted a year or a year and a half or what have you, and you don't have the name of that second, third, or whatever number husband it was, they're hiding under that person's name. And so they may be in the, they may be still be in Chicago or St. Louis or wherever, and you're not
Mhm.
finding them in this or that record because for that time period, they're married to somebody else or listed with their, um, with their last name. So look for gaps in the chronology. You could even look for gaps in children. There may be, like he's got kids, and then there's a 10-year gap and then more kids. Was he married then? And maybe they divorced and she took the kids and nobody talked about it. I had a great uncle that until I did research, I did not realize he had been married for about 5-ish years before he married the woman I knew as my aunt. And he had children with her because after the divorce, she moved away, took the kids with her, and they were rarely, if ever, heard from
Uh,
again. And I kind of, I, and it wasn't something that was talked about quite a bit. And I stumbled on it because I think she's mentioned in my mother's baby book. That's one place where she's mentioned
oh.
as she's listed as one of the gift givers. And I thought, I've never heard of this person. And it turns out it was my uncle's first wife, and he was still married to her at the time my mom was born.
So I had a family member who got upset. She married into the family, and she got upset. She was mad at my uncle and started throwing the stuff in the trash. And one of the pictures she threw away was of an ancestor. And when the picture hit the ground, behind it was a woman. We didn't know who this woman was. It's like, whoa. And so my cousin realized that that might have been the first wife that none of us knew about. Now we have a picture of her.
So
All
the main
right.
thing is put your chronology, put everything in order, and see if there are time periods where you can't account for that person, then that might be a time where they had a relationship or a marriage of which you're not aware.
All right. So we're creating that chronology. And just so that you know, Aimee is going to really show you how to do some chronologies in her quick start, too. Step three is to search for marriages and records that document the relationship. So, what do you mean by records that document the relationship if it isn't a marriage?
The one I can think of, I have another relative that was probably married in the 40s or 50s, very short-term marriage that ended in divorce, and it was not talked about in the family. And I didn't know about it until there was a deed when this person bought a house in the 1980s, and on the deed it referred to them as being divorced and single. And that was the only place. I still can't find the marriage record, but that's the only record I've discovered that referenced the fact that this person had been married and divorced.
Marriage.
Was when they bought their house. That your marital status affects the title to your property. So there was a comment that yes, they were divorced and they were single at the time the property was purchased. So that was in that case, that was where I got a clue. That was a pretty blatant clue as to that
Mm-hmm.
situation. You may look at probate records if we're talking a little bit earlier time period. Sometimes in a probate record, the references to the widow, she may be listed with as we'll see in one of the examples, with a different last name for the name of her dead husband. That would be a big clue. And then maybe that name goes away. And in the case we're going to look at, that name she did, that the guy went away, and that last name went poof after. Um, but
I
go
know
through.
one really cool place where the names show up a lot for women where you didn't know they existed is the Social Security Death Index
Mhm.
applications and index. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you look at that, sometimes it'll list all their aliases and their other names, and you always want to look at that because they might have worked for 2 or 3 years under one of those other names, just as you mentioned, and it's nowhere else documented, but poof, it's in that file. And even sometimes going through all obituaries and records for
Oh.
siblings, if we're talking about
Hmm.
the same time period that you're talking about, and newspaper references. There was another relative I knew she had a second marriage in between 1 and 3, and I went through this was in the '50s, and I went through the newspapers, and there was a reunion she attended, and I'm like, "Well, that first name, that's so and so, but that's a," and then it dawned on me, that's the last name that he didn't attend, so his first name is not there, but at least I got the last name of husband number 2 buried in that reunion reference. So sometimes a newspaper reference could also give you um, that clue, but you've got to go through meticulously year by year and event by event to find some things like that sometimes.
Yeah, that is definitely meticulous. So you search for marriage records, and step four is to document the relationship, followed by review and regroup. I want to show some of your slides.
While you're
So what do
pulling
we
that
have
up,
here?
hang on.
Oh,
While you're pulling that
mhm.
up, Diane had a question about the Social Security Death Index.
Oh,
The death
yes.
index is in a variety of places at Family Search and about Ancestry. The database that I think you're talking about is the one that lists the parents and lists all those aliases. That's at Ancestry. That's not the death index. Death index. That's a different Social
The
Security
claim
record,
file.
the claim file. Yeah, and that's at Ancestry. I'm not certain where else that is at, but I know it's at Ancestry because um, that's where I've used it. Because the death index doesn't give the names like you're talking about. Um,
Right, right. Not the death index, but the application or the mostly it is the application and the claim.
right. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So let's look at this.
This was a step my third great grandfather's third wife. They did the two threes on purpose there to make it easier for me to keep track of it. They were married in Germany in the 1880s, and then he dies, and then she just disappears from the church record after his death, and there's no reference to her dying. And the church records where they were at are pretty extant, pretty meticulous. If she had lived there and died, she'd have been in the church records. So my thought was she's emigrating. And the problem was I wanted to find her United States records, but the thing was I didn't have them. I didn't know where she emigrated or settled in the United States. I also did not have her final husband's name. She didn't have a short-term marriage. She did have a first husband that was a short-term marriage with whom she had um, 3 children, but finding that third husband for her was the problem in an attempt to find her and the one child she had with my ancestor. And the next slide is her tombstone. And how I found her was I had her maiden name. It's one of the names on her tombstone. That's the effect name. And I knew the names of her siblings. And so I researched her siblings. She had a sibling who immigrated to Oklahoma. And I researched the
Okay.
sister, and I found an obituary on the sister, I believe it was, that gave her as a survivor, and then it gave her married name in like 1925 or whatever
Okay,
the year
very
was.
cool.
Yeah, and so it tied me to that. And what was interesting about this individual is her second marriage was to a man with the last name of Gross. Looks like grass, but it's not pronounced like grass. And that last name is not on her tombstone. Her maiden name is under her name. The name beginning with a W, that's the married name. That's her first husband's last name. And the Hyan is her third husband's last name. Her second husband's name does not appear on the stone at all. And based on the chronology, and here is also where a chronology was helpful. Bodie, that's her third and final husband. Anna is her daughter, but Anna was really a Gross, not a Wirtz. She was the child with Geska's second husband, and in a somewhat atypical fashion, Anna, sometimes the person will go by their stepfather's name when the mother has a
Hmm.
subsequent husband. Anna did not do that. She went by her mother's first husband's last name because Geska had children with her first husband, and that gave her the same last name as her half brothers.
Siblings. Okay.
Yeah, so it made sense, but it was atypical. It's not what usually happens when you've got um, a second or a third marriage there. They made it easier for me that they were all on the same tombstone. They all
Yes, they
on
did. They did set it
stone,
up for you, Michael.
and that's even if they're not on the same stone. You always want to look at those neighboring stones. Um, and even if you see a neighboring stone and there's a person you don't know buried with all the other relatives, that could be a short-term spouse. Sometimes when we say short-term spouse, we think, oh, there must have been some scandal associated with it and all this whatever. And sometimes they're a short-term spouse simply because that short-term spouse died. That's
Yes.
what created the short-term um, aspect of that.
Or
So don't
maybe
always
she killed
assume there's
them.
scandal.
You don't know.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean. We see those, and that could be what's going on there. So look at those adjacent stones. One
You
of those
mean that
names you
she's a
don't
serial
recognize.
killer? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we're not gonna. That's a whole different show, and that's a a whole different set of records. But look at those nearby stones because one of those stones of a name you don't recognize could be a short-term spouse, perhaps.
I love that. So what do we have here?
This is
1900
her. This
census.
is her in the 1900 census. Um, Geska was really hard to find because in 1900 she's enumerated as Elizabeth down there, third from the bottom. That's um, not Geska. She's
Oh.
Elizabeth. Bodie, Boede, is listed as Bert. Um, the names are a little bit altered there. Um, that Anna Viertz, that other daughter, is listed, and then the neighboring household is a son that she had by her first marriage. But in records of her in the United States, there's no reference to that second marriage that she had to my triple great grandfather, um, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I'm not sure what the reason was for that, but he's not mentioned in any of the records in the United States whatsoever.
Interesting.
This is another ancestress she's one of my I wouldn't say favorite to research is probably the more accurate phrase to use for Barbara. She was born about 1825, and her first husband died in late 1855 when Barbara's about 30, and she's got two small children. When she marries again in 1859 to a man named Conrad Haas, the spelling of her name is a little bit different, but that Pickert is her. But the license stated, as it says there in quotes, she had no lawful husband living at the
Hmm.
time she married in 1859. And that was not a reference to her dead husband. That, that wasn't the issue. I thought it was because I was very new to research when I found this out, like in 1985 or whatever it was. But that's not a reference to her dead husband. That's a reference to her second husband that I later found out about. I think they're
Oh my
referencing him
goodness.
in the next document here. Um, so pull that one up. Barbara's children had a guardian appointed for them, and in one of the other records, she says this is from 1861. I, Barbara Fennon, late Barbara Beeger, and then she just mentions she's a widow of Peter Beeger, and she's relinquishing her right to some of his. No, she's wanting to get her widow's award to his property. And it's got that Fennon as her name. And this is in 1861. And if you've been paying close attention, she got married in 1859 to Mr. Haas.
My.
There's an error. I got lucky. They made an error. They made an error that helped me. They referred to her as Barbara Fennon. When she signs at the bottom, I cut that off. She signs Barbara Haas. It's in German, but she signs her married name with Conrad as Haas. But she's referred to as Fennon because during the settlement of her husband's estate, that's what her last name was, because she and Mr. Fennon, apparently, I don't think they were ever married. If there is, I cannot find a marriage record. And I
Oh,
can't find the divorce, which makes me think they were never really married. That's why they didn't have to get
okay.
divorced if you don't get married, Um, but she signs her correct married name on this, but because she was Fennon at the point in time when things were being settled, she's Fennon. And then George, that's his name. He's listed in one of the other probate documents. So I do have his first name, but I can find no record of the marriage. If it hadn't been for the estate settlement of her first husband, I would never have known she was married to whatever you want to call it, to Mr. George Fennon, because when she marries Conrad in '59, she is reverted to her not her maiden name, but she's reverted to her
Previous husband.
previous married name. Um, and sometimes if a couple did get divorced, a woman might, especially if it's short term or whatever, and she had no children with him, she may have requested to revert to a previous married name. Um, for reasons that are probably obvious. Uh, but the guardianships and the estate settlement can be a place to get some of these clues that there was a subsequent marriage, especially if the woman's. It's more difficult with the man because you're not going to see his name changing, but with a female, you can see the name change. And again, we want to George. I'd like to know a little more about George because
Yeah.
maybe she knew him. She's a woman. I can't find out where she's from in Germany. And maybe if I knew more about him, maybe they knew each other across the pond or in Cincinnati where they lived for a few years before they came to Illinois. So
Mhm.
they weren't married very long, but there could be some clue in him that could help me with researching
Her.
Barbara. Exactly. So you don't want to ignore these short-term people because they might have had a relationship with your ancestor that could give you some clues about where your person was from.
And so, yep, you're encouraging us to expand because you would have never found that record based on how they indexed those records without knowing that or having access to, or
Right.
you were
And you've
researching her. Yeah.
Right. And you've just got to read. That's why you've got to read everything, even if it looks like a document. Oh, that's just more repetitive stuff from the previous thing 2 years ago or in a document or 6 months ago. You want to read all of that because the widow could be listed with a different name, or it could be a marital status that's changed. And if you don't look at that, you might overlook that clue. Um,
Most definitely. Have you guys out there had any disappearing spouses? I had an ancestor who was a short-term spouse. I never found her in the census with her husband because she like died in between. They got married and she died in between the census. So it was almost like she didn't even exist within the census, but I was able to find a marriage record.
and especially if
See,
if they separate and the kids go with, and they never speak again, it can be. And if they do it between 1905 and 1908, and there's no census, they do that on purpose. It feels like it. They don't, but it
it
sometimes seems
does.
that
They do.
way.
I think they do it on purpose. Michael, that was fantastic. Let us read the steps. And I still miss Jim, but you did amazing without him. Short term spouse. Number one, you want to pick an ancestor, just one. Step two, what are the gaps in the chronology? Step three, you want to search for marriages and records with relationships. There's so many out there. Step four, you want to document the relationship. And then step five, you want to review and regroup. Michael, how do you regroup? What's that mean?
Well, I didn't want to say review and review. You
Oh,
might want
okay.
to pick. You might want to pick a different person. Sometimes you have a clue that somebody had more than one spouse, so that might be the person you're going to pick on next, or make sure you've done the whole family of research as well.
Fantastic, Michael. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
All right. We already have people saying hi to Aimee. Let's give us 1 second. All right, I am so excited to have our special guest. I had to call in a favor. I said, Ari, you got to get me Aimee. I need Aimee on my show. I can't remember the tip that I saw Aimee give, but it was like life changing. It just sunk in and it became my own because it was just that fantastic. So I would like to introduce you to, if you don't already know her, Aimee Cross. Hi,
Hey.
Aimee.
Hi, thank you for having me here. And hey, Ari, nice to see you on the chat.
Yes, they're already saying, Aimee, Aimee. I had to hurry up and get you on here before they tore down the studio. Just kidding, Aimee. So, Aimee, I'm going to ask you the question I ask all of our special guests, and that is to share your 1 minute genealogy story, how you got started, and when you knew that you were hooked.
Well, my grandmothers got me started. Both of my grandfathers died either before I was born or right about, right after I was born, not that long after I was born. But I was really close to both of my grandmothers, and they're wonderful. And I just love them, and they shared their love of their family history with me. They both approached it a little differently, but I love to hear about what they were doing, and they totally hooked me with their stories. I've always loved to hear the stories about all of the crazy people that you have in your family and the fun things that have happened and their amazing experiences. Just love those stories. So,
I love those stories too. Grandmoms are fun, aren't they?
oh yeah.
And they probably just really enjoyed sharing with you. They knew they had you, and so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it really is. And they were just so fun. And I'm so grateful that they got me started on it because I don't know what I would have done if, I mean, it's just become such a passion. So I'll be forever thankful.
Yes, yes. You got to thank the ancestors for bringing you to the ancestors.
It's true.
So, Aimee, I love your quick start. And we have a lot of slides, and you have a lot of great information. So, you ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
All right. So we have initial steps for pre-1850 research. Why is pre-1850 research so important, and why do we need this process?
Well, like you talked about at the beginning, it's just the tick mark, right? You have the head of household, and then you have just how many males or females are in 1790. You don't even have that hardly. So that a lot of people just think I can't figure this out. It's where they stop. And when I was doing a lot, I still do client projects, but I was hammering them out for a number of years. And this was the majority of the work that I did was people were looking for finding the parents of somebody born, 1820, 1790, something like that. And so I did a lot of it. So this is kind of how I started. This doesn't guarantee that you will find what you're looking for, but it's a start, right? It's like it's what you start with, and then you can keep going from there. So,
Love it. So let's go ahead and get started with initial steps for pre-1850 research. And so step one is and Aimee will go through the steps and then we'll go through the slides, if that's okay.
okay, sure. All
We'll,
right. So step
we'll
one
chat.
is to set
All
a
right.
reasonable
So
research
step
goal. Oh,
Mhm.
go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't know what you were doing. Go ahead. I think you're not hearing me really well. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. And so, Aimee, what's reasonable? Because, I get questions. I say, what do you want to know? And it's always like, I want to know the enslaver. I want to be back to Africa. Like, there's baby steps. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, totally. It's absolutely about baby steps. If you try to bite off more than you can really chew in one little group, you'll get frustrated and you'll get discouraged, and you don't want that. So set something little and then work on that.
Okay. And Aimee has some examples of some. Give me an example of something that's little.
Just like finding the parent of a person, like who's the father of John Smith, right? That was born in 1830. and lived in this place. You know, it's not, I want to figure out, like you were saying, I want to go back to Africa. That's a lot. I want to find, 3 generations from John Smith, who was born in 1830. That's a lot. And sometimes you may not, the wife may be a whole nother project. Sometimes you might be able to find more information through the process than you were initially expecting in your goal. But if you start with a reasonable goal, then you'll be better off.
All right, so we're going to start with a reasonable research goal. Then we are going to create a timeline. I love timelines. So talk to me a little bit about timelines and why they're so helpful.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's so many times that people have made mistakes because they didn't use a timeline. A timeline helps you see when you have maybe missed something. Like it'll help you also recognize if somebody traveled, like when was their children born? And if you know where their children were born, that can help you know that they moved from point A to point B between 2 of their kids. Anyway, when you put stuff in a timeline, it just kind of makes things fall into place for you. And it can make a really big difference. And you can just use the timeline that you see on Ancestry. You don't have to create anything crazy, but it helps.
So Aimee has some pretty cool timelines. I can't wait to share those with you. Let's move on to step 3, which is okay, now the magic is happening. Get ready for the magic. Is to determine the earliest recorded county for the person. So how do you figure that out, Aimee?
Well, let me tell you why, first off, because the counties are where most of the records are held, except for in New York. They're weird. They hold them in townships. But in the United States, most of these records that we're looking at are in counties. And so it helps you need to find the earliest county of residence, if at all possible. And that may be a marriage record. It may be a census record. It may be one of the children's birth records. But that's where you kind of have to begin, because if you just have John Smith born in Ohio, good luck, right? But if you can narrow it down, then you'll be better off.
Fantastic. Step 4 is to perform a census evaluation to compile people into family groups. This is my jam too. You said that this was your jam. I love this, Aimee. Talk to us about a census evaluation.
Well, what I'm talking about is kind of doing the research to determine who lived in that county at that time. And so, and I'm not talking just, a lot of times people just search by their ancestor's name. But what you want to do is you want to become the expert of the Smiths in some county in Ohio, or wherever you're looking, right? And you're going to know about all those folks that have that surname, particularly the ones that had kids, that maybe were around your ancestor's age, depending on what your earliest known record is. A lot of this is kind of common sense too, but anyway, the census evaluation is just kind of looking at every single person by that surname in that one area.
All right. Seems simple because we are always surname driven. Okay, so we're going to do that. Step 5 is then to collect the earliest record type for all with the same surname in the county. So if you had a marriage was the earliest, then you're going to look for all the marriages.
Well, what you're going to look is you're going to be looking at, marriage records are really helpful as you get this group of people together. And so you can be looking at marriage records, or you can go into other types of records too. And this is kind of the way you've done it is kind of the next step. But you're really going to just kind of be looking at any of those records that you can find in the county for that surname. I'm kind of combining those last two steps on you, the way we worded it. And then that way you can start putting those family members together and figuring out, how all these people with that surname fit. And hopefully you'll be able to start putting them together in families.
Yes. And then the last step before we start looking at Aimee's wonderful slides is to select another record type and collect.
Yeah.
So Aimee, let's look at your cool slides and go through these together.
Okay.
All right, so here we go. We're doing these good research goals, right? We're not getting crazy.
Yeah, you just don't want to be too broad. You want to, specifically name the individual that you're focusing on and then include that date and place, so John Smith, who was, married in, I don't know, counties in Ohio, in Butler, I think there's a Butler County in Ohio, Butler County, Ohio, on this date.
Cuyahoga.
Oh,
Guess what?
thanks. That one's easy.
That's the
Cuyahoga.
only
There
one
you
I
go.
know.
I don't know why I started with Ohio. I don't do research very often for my family in Ohio. So anyway, but yeah, so keep it short and sweet, but include that important information because there could be 3 John Smiths, in that county. So you want to make sure that you think about when your guy was born or about when he was born and work that way.
And so these are some cool examples.
Yeah. Yeah, you're just adding in the place and the time. That's it. Yeah, just make it simple. Keep it simple.
All right. Timelines.
Yeah, and then you want to put them into that timeline. You want to be looking at where they were. Go ahead and click to the next slide that shows them some other examples. That's a timeline that I put in a book, and it looks really pretty. It's not super useful for genealogical research. So go ahead and hit the next slide. And this is one that I do in Excel, and then you can sort it by different columns as well, which can be really helpful sometimes. But that just will show you a little bit more about, what events happened to the different individuals in the family and how in this example, and you got to do what works for you, right? My method may not be your jam, and that's fine. You've got to do what works for you and just put it into a format that's going to work with your brain. And so in this one, I use the event and then I put the location. So,
and it's nice. You can see exactly what's happening.
yeah.
And if you use software, you can just export this and have it.
Yeah,
I love this
absolutely.
thing. What's going on here?
Here's another one that's in a table. And in this one, I colored the counties. Or I colored, what did I do in this one? In this one, I colored different things by different dates, like when different people were born that were of interest to my research thing. And then in the gray stuff, it talks about when counties were formed, because that's one of the other things that a lot of people don't know, right? Records are generally, not always, but records are generally held in the county that they were created in. So if you're researching in one county, but it was actually formed from another county in like 1810, and you're looking for somebody that you might be looking for a record in 1800, you need to look in the county from which it was formed, because you're not going to find it probably in the county that it became, right? It's going to be
and during those crossover years, it's absolutely horrible.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Good point. So anyway, there's lots of different ways to do it. You just got to do what works for you.
Yes, I love this. I did this with, I won't talk about it. So this is how
Okay.
you were talking about finding the earliest record place.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, I just use the ancestry timeline, and that shows me that I know, where somebody was born, but I like in that one, you can see that I kind of know where they were born, but I don't have the county, but then I know the county intermarriage. So for Marianne Milloway, the first record I have for her is her marriage record.
Okay. And so then next would be, here we go with the census evaluation.
Yeah. So now I'm just doing the census evaluation, and I do them in Ancestry. I like the way Ancestry demonstrates their census records, the way they highlight the people that you're looking for and stuff. But you can do them in Family Search, which is free, or you can do them anywhere. But when I do a census evaluation, I do what I call in my YouTube videos a clean search. And I go up there to the top left, and I just look at censuses. And then if you hit the next slide, and then I just put in, keep it simple. I just put in the last name of Milloway in Albemarle County, Virginia. And I want to keep it exact to that county and adjacent counties. And then that's going to show me the people by the name of Milloway that are living there around the time that she married. So, and then after I get my results, then I use those filters to, on the left-hand side, to select the years of interest, which I'm going to be looking at the records before and after her marriage initially. And so now I have these 1830 results for Mary, or for different Milliways. And in this instance, I've only got 3. So it's 3 people, right? So now I'm going to really start thinking about those 3 individuals that are potential parents of hers.
So I want to just take 1 second. So basically, you're starting with 1850 or whichever census is the most appropriate, and you just work your way back, pulling all the Milliways, 1860, 50, 40, 30, 20.
Yeah,
That's
usually
what
I
you're doing
start,
here.
yeah, usually I start, like, especially with a woman, you kind of have to think about who you're talking about. But with a woman, usually, not always, but they lived at home. You know what I mean? They weren't, often you find them at home. And so it's not like they were traveling the world in the early 1800s, right? That probably didn't happen. So I'm looking at the census records, that particularly the census record before that marriage, and a household that has a female of the appropriate age in the household. That's going to be a big clue to me. But then I may be going back to maybe where, when she was born. I'll probably take the evaluation to when she was born. But then I'll also look at the census records after that marriage happened, because if I have her in the census with her husband, like let's say in 1840, I have her with her husband, I have her husband with a female of her age living together, then I'm kind of looking for those people that had a female before the marriage and now don't have a female after the marriage. That's a clue that I may be on the right track. So, but you need more than just that to figure it out, right? You've got to look for other records because you need more proof. That's not enough to feel comfortable with.
Most definitely. Let's get back to these slides. I love this evaluation, and I love focusing. Like, Ancestry throws so much stuff at you when you do a search, and it's just crazy. And so choose just focusing on one record type in 1 year at a time. I can see where that's beneficial.
Yeah, you got to narrow it down. And so then you start having these groups. Go ahead and hit the next slide. And you start putting together, I put that slide in there. I start to keep track of them. Like, I make a fake dad and I start listing all these people. And I usually put a tree tag on there saying, because my tree is public, but my client trees are never public, so nobody else is going to see it. But then that helps me kind of keep track of all of my potential parental candidates. And then I can see what Ancestry gives me for those people too, because they may have a great, record that, that immediately pops. So, but let's go on to the next slide.
Okay, wait a minute. Did you just say you make a fake dad?
I do. I make fake dads.
You said you make a fake dad. Talk to us about the fake dad.
I just put a guy in with the last name and that's it. You know what I mean? And then I can start listing, like on that other slide, I just start listing all of the people. They're not siblings most of the time, but it's a placeholder for me. And the danger is, if your tree's private, you could be sending people on like a wild goose chase. But I always make it really clear that that's what I'm doing. I put it in the comments. I make a tree tag so people know I'm just messing around now. I'm just kind of trying to figure this out.
So I've seen trees like that, and it's totally freaked me out. I'm like, there's no way this could be the parent. There's no way this and that. Like, what are they doing? Like, this is poison in here. Like, what are they? So, okay. So the fake dad thing, and you're just kind of putting, okay. Okay. So I do fun trees, and I put people in, but then I break the relationship. So they're kind of like floating trees around.
Yeah, you know I do floating trees a lot too. When I'm doing something like this, though, I don't want it to be hard for me to go from person to person. And so that's why I do that. But like I said, usually when I'm doing this, I'm doing it for a client, and it's a private tree and it's not searchable. And so I'm not going to mess anybody up. So, but my motto is, my tree
so
says my tree name, and it says working tree. And my motto is if you copy my tree and it's wrong, that, sorry, I'm experimenting and shame on you. You know what I mean? It's like you ought to be like looking at your stuff yourself. So a lot of people are really offended by that, but that's my motto. But I do make it pretty clear there. On my own tree, it's pretty clear. So.
No, I love that. So you gave me a reason to have a fake dad or a fake mom instead of floating people. Easier to navigate. So thank you, Aimee.
Yeah, you
Let's
bet.
go back to your slides.
All right.
So this is the fake dad scenario.
Yeah,
we have a
that's the fake
scenario
dad
inside of the process.
And so then you just need to organize, you need to start organizing your people. You can organize them with the fake parents, or you can do another spreadsheet. And here I have a spreadsheet with the different years. Maybe you do a mind map. Whatever works for you. You just have to do what works for you.
So basically you're just putting in, you have a column with the name and then a column for each census year. And then you're putting in like the ticks that are there, the ages, the sexes, and the number. Okay.
Yeah, it helps me to know. I get to see the progression.
Talk to me about them. Yes, this is a beautiful way to see this. Help me understand the mind map.
Well, it's not my method of choice. I'll be honest with you. It's too confusing for me. But a lot of people are paper people, and that may be what works for them. And so really, honestly, you just have to do what works for you.
Yes, I get that. I get that. I love it. It just looks really cool, though.
That's another example. So you can go. It's very similar to the other ones. You can go on to the next one.
Okay.
And so now your next step is to start creating family groups. And you're going to do that by finding additional records. Like maybe if you're late enough, you might find this family in the 1850 census, and you may be able to start naming off some of the people, but maybe not. So then you're going to have to go to other record groups in order to try to fill out that family, probate records and deeds and, other things like that, so that you can kind of start to figure out who each one of these families is.
Mm-hmm.
So. And so on this one, this just shows I start to figure out the different names of the family members that are in that particular family. So.
Oh, who do you think the tick is?
Yeah, exactly. And I can do that by, like in this example, like Franklin was born in New York. This is a family that moved around a lot. Franklin was born in New York, and in 1850, he's 22. Well, he's the kid that was under 5 in 1830 and 10 to 14 in 1840, probably. Now, right, there's no census names, but I mean, there's no relationships, right, in the 1850 census, but you can kind of come up with estimations. So.
I love this.
I don't want to run out of time. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, because I'm afraid we're not going to be able to get through.
Oh no, we have 7 minutes.
Okay. So on this one, this is marriage records, and sometimes marriage records will do it for you. I every once in a while you get lucky now, but the important part is to find all of them. So this is a great example of the marriage of Mary Ann Milloway and her husband, William O. Harris. And if you go to the next slide, that's the minister's return, which is great. But you can have lots of different marriage records, and that's just, some of them. So if you keep going to that next slide, and you can have even more, right, types of marriage records. And then if you go to the next one, you'll see, then I have the kind of in the background, these slides kind of got funny.
Oh, sorry.
In the background is the marriage license. And at the very bottom of the record, there's a note that there was something submitted by Isaac Milloway. And then if I go to the next page of the record group, which, by the way, always look at the pages around it, you see that Isaac Milloway and Judith Milloway gave permission for their daughter, Mary Ann, to get married because she was underage. So in this marriage record, I got a pretty substantial answer here. So yay. But it's not always
Yay.
that easy, right? You know, that was lucky,
No.
but that it isn't always that easy. But sometimes it is, and when it is, great. So then you start diving into other records, right? You're looking at tax records, court records, church records, burials, military records, local histories. You're looking at deeds and you're looking at probate records, because all of those other types of records can give you some of those answers, can start filling in the family. And then essentially what you're doing is you're kind of working, you know, you're kind of doing a process of elimination. You're going to go to, you know, you're going to kind of say, hey, this record, you know, these records, I've now identified all of this other Millaway's daughters through their marriage records or whatever, maybe in a probate record. I know now I can name his children that I found in those census records, and none of them are my Marianne.
Yes.
So then I know, right? I know that that guy ain't my guy. And so then I can work down and start looking at the other guys. And sometimes in this type of research, it's more of a process of elimination. And you don't, you know, you just don't find a definitive answer like that marriage record. Maybe you don't get it. And that's
Right.
okay. And sometimes you kind of have to write a proof argument and say, which is a whole nother conversation, but to say, I believe this is the father due to the fact that I've eliminated everybody else and he had a daughter this age and da-da-da-da-da, right? So.
Yes, you just have to go through the process of elimination, like you say. You can't just say, "Well, I'm pretty sure that's not him." But yeah, I totally get that. I think you have some more records.
This is an example of full text searching, which is now available on Family Search, that makes looking at deeds and wills and probate records so much easier. So make sure you go to Family Search and utilize that. Yeah, I have a video about how to use the full text searches on Family Search. And I actually have on my channel, I have a video that goes into more details on these steps as well. It's called, I think it's called 1700s research. I don't know why I named it that way. But anyway, so you can check that out, and it's got more than we are able to cover, you know, today. But yeah, full text searching is so powerful. It saves so much time now.
I believe that full text searching is the best thing that happened to us in genealogy since DNA. Like, what is bigger than this?
Oh, I'm with you. Yeah, totally. There's so many things you can get out of full text searching. Like you guys were talking about earlier, right? You know, a lot of times people weren't put in an index. You know, you have so many records where it says so-and-so et al. Well, that means there's a boatload of other names on there, right? And they're not often in those indexes. But with full text searching, you can find them. So I'm with you. I haven't thought about it in those terms, but I think you're right.
All right, before I start getting my mind blown again, just thinking about it, let's just run through the steps. Aimee, that was fabulous. Thank you. I'm ready to just go start doing it. I did it with my people back to 1870 so I could understand what the Reconstruction community would be like. And so I'm really looking forward to going pre-1850. Let's look at these steps. Initial steps for pre-1850 research. Step 1, set a reasonable research goal. Step 2, create a timeline of what you have. Step 3, determine the earliest recorded county for the person. Step 4, perform a census evaluation to compile people into family groups. Step 5, collect the earliest record type for all with the same surname in the county. Step 6, then you want to select another record type to collect, and Michael and Jim like to call that wash, rinse, and repeat.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Aimee, thank you so much. I want to bring Michael back, and I want to share Aimee's, check her out at ancestryaimee.com. She has so much going on. You want to stay up with Aimee. And Michael, don't forget about more genealogy tip of the day. And Jim, as well of recent roots and branches, the best of roots and branches. Aimee, again, thank you so much. It's been a true pleasure. And Michael, as always, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Okay.